to the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. Good afternoon, Cormac.
David, good afternoon. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, really good to see you as well. This news has just broken about the ICC issuing these arrest warrants for Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant as well, one of the leaders of Hamas. Just in terms of that, I mean, it also depends from here how this evolves, because it will depend on those 124 member states as to whether this is taken forward. I mean, how binding is this? Does this mean anything?
Well, it probably means about as much as the ICC arrest warrant on Vladimir Putin at the moment. And I would imagine as long as Benjamin Netanyahu remains in power, there is little or no chance of that arrest warrant being executed. But look, the Middle East is not my area of expertise, so I will sure. comment carefully on this. And the first thing to say is I, for one, am an absolute supporter of Israel, not just Israel's right to exist and to respond in the most robust fashion after the sickening atrocities of October the 7th last year. But there has been, and in the circles that I move in and the people that I speak to, there has been increasing concern of how the IDF has been conducting some of its operations in Gaza. Now, my concern about this is mainly the effect that this has on on our rules-based order and the current war that we are all in against the axis of evil, which is Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China. And, I note the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu, from the outbreak of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, effectively didn't lift a finger to support Ukraine, despite Ukraine being the only country in history, I think, to have not just a Jewish president, but a Jewish prime minister at the time also, who was Volodymyr Groysman. And, I'm willing to say that the problem with Netanyahu and others in Israel and in his cabinet is he has far too long tried to keep one arse cheek on the Western stool and one arse cheek on the Russian stool. And, Netanyahu really needs to pick a side. But this is a huge problem for the Americans, and it's a huge problem for others in the, what I would call the transatlantic alliance and our allies, who are increasingly facing this global threat. So it's bad news all round. It's not great news for Netanyahu, and it doesn't reflect well on the Israeli government, but it's bad news globally for all of us as well, because it weakens our moral case, if you like.
Let's move on and talk about Ukraine. This is a breaking line as well. Britain is now directly involved in the Ukraine war after its Storm Shadow missiles were used to strike targets inside Russia, according to Moscow's ambassador. He was speaking on Sky News. This is Andrei Kelin, accused Ukraine of using mercenaries from different countries in the fighting. Obviously, this comes on the back of the change in policy from the Biden administration, the outgoing Biden administration, saying they can use these new rockets in the Kursk region. I suppose the reasoning for this was partly because the administration is outgoing, but also the concerns about North Korea sending troops to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, it looks like Britain has been given the authorization to use the Storm Shadows, or Ukraine has been given the authorization to use British-made Storm Shadows. And, of course, the rhetoric on both sides ramping up. I think this is deeply concerning.
Well, it is concerning, and the first thing I would say is, I was delighted to see initially the Biden administration give permission to use the ATACMS, and fully expected, and in fact I said only a couple of days ago that I hoped that we would not announce it, that the first we would hear was when a target had been hit, because why should we signpost to the Russians what we are doing? But the words of Andrei Kelin I would dismiss. Britain has been were one of the very first to arm Ukraine in the run-up to the full-scale invasion, and it was the lightweight anti-tank weapons, the NLAWs, which were probably responsible, along with the American Javelins, for saving Kyiv.
Just in terms of that, of course, Given all of this, the threshold, according to Putin, has now been lowered. So we know that he has actually changed the law. He has signed into law the ability to use nuclear strikes against conventional weapons. They're threatening to fire these intercontinental ballistic missiles as well, the RS-26 missile. So Putin, just in terms of where we go, there is a limited time frame before Trump comes into power. He says he's going to end this war within day one or a few days of taking hold of the reins of the United States. What's your reading of this?
Well, on Trump first, we know that Donald Trump is notoriously unpredictable. What I will predict is he will not end this war on day one or within a few days. But I think the importance of what the Biden administration did in allowing the ATACMS to be used inside Russian territory, albeit still with restrictions. So we have not taken the handcuffs off the Ukrainians completely. And it was very clear that the Americans were telling us and the French that we could not use Storm Shadow and the French version of Storm Shadow Scalp because they contained US components in them. So I predicted a number of months ago, although I have been a voice from the very start calling, one, for these weapons to be supplied, and two, for these weapons to be allowed be used on military targets inside Russia, from where murderous attacks on Ukrainian civilian targets are being launched every day. But I did predict many months ago that I thought nothing would happen until after the election, because I think Biden simply would have seen that as possibly damaging the Democratic chances. He now has nothing to lose.
But also, isn't this too little too late from the United States? Because actually what they should have done is shown leadership a long time ago.
Well, to be honest, David, it has been in terms of our supplying armament to Ukraine for as many billion as we have given. It has always been too little, too late. Both on it was too late that we gave them the modern battle tanks. It was too late that we gave them the long-range artillery. Then the F-16s are only starting to dribble in now, and now we talk about the ability to use these weapons behind Russia's lines. So, I try to remain optimistic, and my hope is that the Ukrainians will be able to make as much use out of these weapons between now and the end of January, when Donald Trump comes into power, when he is very likely to push for a negotiation, because Ukraine must be in the strongest possible position in those negotiations to negotiate with Putin from a position of strength, which is the only way Russia can ever be dealt with.
I mean, it seems we're living in an increasingly unstable world, and we're also hearing, this is from the Defence Secretary, the armed forces will be hit by 500 million quid's worth of cuts. This was announced yesterday, and of course this is hours after the Storm Shadows, as you were rightly saying, have been used into the heart of Russia. Just in terms of that, I mean, £500 million of cuts, the scrapping of 6 major programmes, including the Army's main fleet of drones, HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, 1 Type 23 frigate, Chinooks heavy lift helicopters, a Puma medium lift, also removing those UAVs, but no plan for replacement, despite the British government saying they're going to increase defence spending to 2.3%, maybe 2.5%. None of this makes much sense.
No, David, it doesn't, and I'm very, very concerned because, our world is probably at its most dangerous juncture since 1939, and, if we need to remind anybody that the first job of a government in a democracy is the defence of the realm. Now, the previous government had committed to 2.5%, which certainly myself and my colleagues consider an absolute minimum given where we are at the moment. Labour has consistently failed to commit to that, and they have said, 2.5% when they can afford it, and they have used, I believe, this strategic defence review under Lord Robinson to effectively kick this into the long grass. The defence review should tell us how to spend the money. The fact that that money needs to be made available can be under no doubt. The other thing that I would say is, in terms of the very point that you made, scrapping systems is not unusual. And it happened under the last Tory administration. It happens all the time because we expect our armed forces, small though they are at the moment, to be technologically and technically among the very best in the world. But my problem is, what is it being replaced with? So it seems to be, you can't have it both ways. If you're saying there's a defense review, let's wait until the outcome of that defense review. But this seems to be the worst of both worlds to me. And I would just quote Ben Wallace, if I can finish, by saying, said, I think last night, he said that this suggests to him that the penny simply has not dropped with this Labour government about the perilous situation that we and our allies are now in.
Yeah, Ben Wallace, as you say, the former Defence Secretary, cautioned that the cuts will send a message, a bad message, to our adversaries. And he says for our enemies to be deterred, they must know we intend no holes in our capabilities, or at least we will soon be upgrading them. Your point really being we need to commit now to 2.5% at a minimum, and then when the defence review comes out, we will then know how to spend that money.
Absolutely. David, can I make one more point? Look, I've been saying since 2016, when I first went out to Ukraine and really started to, learn that we needed to see Russia through Ukrainian eyes and through the eyes of other people in the eastern neighbourhood, in the Baltics and the Poles. Now, Poland has just committed to get close to 5%. I think it's 4.9% they have committed to get their defence spending up to. The three small Baltic states are between 3 and 3.5% of their GDP, and the two new NATO members, Finland and Sweden, are both currently committed to and approaching 2.5%. Now, Britain has had an absolutely central leadership role in leading the charge with the support of Ukraine against Russia, and I would say going forward that Britain must retain that central role with allies in Europe. My problem is, my jury at the moment is out as to whether, despite the warm words that we've had from the Secretary of Defence, the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister, of shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine until the very end, as long as it takes and all that, I'm not convinced that we have the same awareness of the peril that we are in from this Labour government, or indeed the same commitment to Ukraine. And I've heard some worrying sounds coming out of Kyiv that they are not too sure that they have the same ironclad support that they had under the previous government either.
Cormac, thank you so much for your time. That's Cormac Smith, their former advisor to the Ukrainian Foreign